In 1951, 2 years after Chairman Mao consolidated power in China, Communist Chinese armies began invading Tibet. As Chinese troops fought their way through the outlying provinces in Kham and Amdo, they forced Tibetans into dreaded communes, separated families, suppressed Tibetan Buddhism, and used slave labor to build roads into central Tibet. In 1959, when Chinese troops reached the Tibetan capital of Lhasa, 80,000 Tibetans died during the rebellion. The night Chinese troops started shelling the Potala Palace, the Dalai Lama escaped on a long and arduous journey across the Himalayas. Thousands of Tibetans followed the Dalai Lama into exile. It took 10 years to convince John to go to Tibet with me. Despite sending him the great Western classics, Alexandra David Neal, My Journey to Lhasa, and Heinrich Herr's 7 Years in Tibet, John kept saying that he had professional responsibilities.
Well, at the time, I was a lawyer in Mississippi doing civil rights work. Yeah, Blake had been sending me books, and but it came a time when I had a natural break and was ready to have another adventure. You know, we'd been spending summers climbing and stuff, but I really wanted to see China. And the best way to do it is just traveling overland in trains and buses and what have you. We spent a full month going across China and really getting a feel for, it wasn't easy travel, but it was really important. And ultimately, to see that transition of what it was like to go through China and then up onto the plateau and into a different culture. The train line ends in Golmud, and that's when you have to get on a bus. And that was the most incredible 2 days in this cramped little bus.
When we arrived in the Tibetan plateau, we realized quite quickly that there was no public transportation anywhere. So we ended up hitchhiking in the Everest direction. It was 500 miles, and the first town we got to was Gyantse.
Gyantse was a gorgeous, but very underdeveloped, old-fashioned Tibetan town. And like all over Tibet, you see monasteries in shambles. And it almost feels like these monasteries could have been destroyed, 500 years ago. But they were just destroyed, a few decades ago. And you just kind of get used to it, but you realize that that you're really, it's kind of like a ghost land because these monasteries were huge, and in Gyantse, the monastery is on a hill right in front of the town. So it's this constant reminder, this empty lot basically with just a couple buildings left on it, and the rest of it had been destroyed.
So when we got to Tingri, suddenly the sun came out, and it was just spectacular. I remember John playing hoops with kids. Kids were like, John was the Pied Piper in Tingri. And the metal hoop that kids used to play in Europe, well, these kids in Tingri were playing that, and they were following you around. It was really neat. it was about 50 miles of trekking and hiking to get to Rambach Monastery. And hiking in the mountains is a series of endless summits. You think you're at the top and then you're not. There's another thing higher. And so we were going through this for quite a few days. And I remember getting to Rambach Monastery, and suddenly with the stupa, you stand up there and you could see the full-blown north face of Everest, which was spectacular. So suddenly we are insignificant specks in the universe, and it was just a fabulous feeling. We hitchhiked back to Lhasa, basically, and there were some long, cold waits in between because it's a high-altitude desert. If you have the direct sun on you, you can get a sunburn. If you put your hand into the shade, you could get frostbite within a short period of time because there's no moisture in the air. So it was a pretty wild hitch to Lhasa.
One thing we didn't realize at the time, but that's the same route that the Tibetans used to escape to Nepal. So we weren't looking for it at the time, but bands of Tibetans could have easily been refugees heading for the border, because that border is not patrolled, or there's nothing there, so you can get over it. And that was how Tibetans, for years and still to this day, go to see the Dalai Lama.
The Barkor is a warren of medieval alleys, two-story Tibetan homes, and traditional Tibetan architecture. So this was basically the heart and soul of Lhasa, for Tibet. And we went and put our backpacks down at a Tibetan hotel, and I wanted just to start recuperating from 30 to 40 pounds that I'd lost the hard way, and just hang out basically, and hang out with Westerners and drink beer and write exaggerated postcards home, And John wanted to go to the Jokang Temple.
So there is some tension which began between us when I wanted to go and learn more about the country and go to monasteries. So, we had our home base in the room, but, we'd just be doing different stuff during the day. I love the Jokang because the Jokang, unlike all these bombed out monasteries, was a real living temple, and it was the heart of Lhasa. And just seeing the faces of pilgrims come from all over the country and prostrate in front of the Jokang and do a circumambulate within its walls. So I could just sit there for hours.
What is it like being a monk today? What do you do as a monk?
So, just workers. If the tourist freedom, actually the monastery is school now. But today only they open. Only the people allowed to come open the butter. After that nothing. Buddhism not only this the only one thing about Buddhism now. But the most important thing they're going to learn more, because the scriptures very deep, and also scripture. First time you can understand, after you can meditation and practice. But today people only believe and nothing how to practice, how to become Buddha.
We could, we had rented bikes and we were cruising around the city. So I challenged him to a race up the stairs of the Batala, and the stairs they're huge, and there's they switch back up, and so that got him, I think, a little. The competition between us, you could easily ignite. It had been emptied, of course, during the Cultural Revolution, but it hadn't been destroyed. So you just felt this, unbroken chain of centuries of devotion there. Yeah, well, that's another thing about being on the Batala is you're way high above the Lhasa Valley, so you can really get a sense of what's happening in the city, and you can clearly see the Tibetan quarter, which, like I said, it's just this maze of alleyways. But then behind the Patala, to the north, was this kind of sea of Chinese buildings or barrack-like structures. So it was a very divided city that you could clearly see from the Patala. And at that point, we didn't know where it was, but there was a prison that you could barely see if you knew where to look.
And so in Sera Monastery, they have a thing called sky burial, where the monks will break up the bones and the flesh of corpses and mix them with Tibetan barley flour. And lammergeiers, which are enormous condors with 11 and 12-foot wingspans, will come down and have a corporeal feast, a feast on the remains of the corpses, and take them up into the sky, which the Tibetans call the heaven realm.
During the demonstration, I saw at one point 2 monks running in. I don't think I knew at that point who it was. It was Jampa Tenzin. They were in there about 20 minutes, and when they came out, Jampa Tenzin was badly burned on his arms and his head, and he was lifted up by the crowd and carried around, and he came to symbolize that day.
I documented 12 deaths on October 1st, men, women, and children. I saw a 16-year-old boy who was beaten to death inside the police station with a shovel. He was lying in his mother's lap. His mother was trying to pour water into his unresponsive lips from one of these chalices that you could buy in the market. I saw a 25-year-old man who was shot through the heart. He was dead. He was being carried on a table through the crowds. I remember, I'll never forget seeing one Chinese policeman hiding behind a pole, and he was shooting at a kid that was right next to me. And I picked up rocks at that time, and I wasn't thinking about it. I threw rocks at that policeman. And I saw a man carrying a 10-year-old boy in his arms, and when I got to him, I could see that he was shot through the chest, so I put hands on the entrance and exit wounds, and he died in my hands. There was nothing I could do. At the end of the riot, I heard that Tibetans who were taken to the local Lhasa People's Hospital were identified as being wounded during the riot and taken to prison. When we heard that, there was a small group of Westerners who we formed like a medical underground. We had Tibetans and Westerners working together to go to the Tibetan hotels and get donations of antibiotics and pain medicines. And I started sneaking out to treat the wounded. We had to be very careful that we weren't seen because the police would go in and take that person to prison. So mainly traveling at night on rooftops, I snuck into monasteries and people's homes if they gave us permission. The worst thing that I saw was one time sneaking into a home with a translator, and there was a Tibetan man who had been shot in the calf. And so when I'm attending to his bullet wound, I asked his wife, do you have any children? And as soon as I did that through the translator, I saw that I had committed a faux pas, that she was upset by this. And after a few minutes, she told me through the translator that she was 18 years old and 8 months pregnant when she was told by her work unit leader to go to the Lhasa People's Hospital. When she was there, she was given an injection in her abdomen that induced abortion. And she heard her baby cry twice, once when the baby came out, when the head presented in the birth canal, and once when the doctor gave a lethal injection in the soft spot of the child's forehead. And the next day she was taken to be sterilized.
When the time came for the day of our flight, we went to the Holiday Inn, which is the fanciest hotel. We tried to mix in with the, high-paying tourists because we thought if we were in their line that we'd be less suspicious. So, we just went and we crossed our fingers, and I think because we were with them, they weren't really checking that group of passengers, and we got through. And you know, all my film was in my bag, my backpack. And I just remember taking off and being so relieved that we were leaving, but also really sad and feeling like what we were leaving behind was just, you know, horrible.
When we landed in Kathmandu in New Delhi, we were greeted by reporters who were aware of our story. And I remember initially the reporters were asking us questions like, why did Tibetans shoot Tibetans? Why did Tibetans steal guns from the police and shoot at Tibetans? And this was nothing that we had seen. So at that moment, John and I just started telling what we had seen, and we realized that we had become credible witnesses, and it was enough to refute the Chinese propaganda at the time.
And then we really wanted to see the Dalai Lama. And turns out that he had already heard about us through the media, and he wanted to see us. So we were like elated, and we went to India and had a meeting with them, and he, you know, point blank asked us. He really wanted to know if Tibetans had been violent, and he was clearly troubled that a lot of Tibetans were throwing rocks.
Dalai Lama said at that point that Tibetan Buddhism does not proselytize. They don't try to convert other people to Tibetan Buddhism. They accept all religions that are based on love. And he said that everyone has their own path. And I remember when he said that I realized that my path would involve documenting human rights in Tibet, that, you know, we would do the best we could to go back and document as best we could what was going on in China's military occupation of Tibet.
Yeah. The demonstration we saw in October 1987 was even smaller than ones several after that. In '89 especially, there's massive demonstrations that went citywide. And one time, I think it was the People's Armed Police stormed the Jokong Temple, and we're like clearing it out. And one of the Chinese who was videoing all this, either he or someone else smuggled that out to the West. So, you know, and we've seen that hundreds of times since then. Just, you know, police beating monks senseless, kicking them. So that was probably, you know, when we were there in 1987, there's no video footage. It's only stills. So this was one of the first times we really saw video. I went back 4 times, and both to Central Tibet and also to Eastern Tibet. So one of the things I took on myself is going back and photographing the prisons. And they'd never been photographed before, and even, you know, I went and we interviewed Tibetans in Nepal as they came out, and I'd take down, you know, the details of the prison as best I could. Sometimes they'd have these little sketches, these maps of, you know, what hill you should climb and where you should look. And so I was able to get a visa still, so I just went back and started doing that. Initially, torture is used to get information. And it could be hanging by your thumbs, being left outdoors, dogs. It's an amazing array because, you know, Tibet is a big place, and you have different cultures, different types of, you know, guards in different places, and it's really no holds barred.
In order to film Dropshi and Sanyi prisons without being seen, I scrambled to vantage points in the hills. The cliffs above Sangye gave dramatic views of an enormous prison complex, with guards doing drills, prisoners in cell blocks, and long lines with hundreds of prisoners being marched outside to break rocks at the base of the cliffs below. After interviewing Tibetan refugees in India and Nepal, John and I wrote a report for Physicians for Human Rights that chronicled the routine torture of Tibetan political prisoners. Tortures included beatings, suspension, electric shocks, and trained attack dogs. The worst violations, the worst tortures were reserved for women, especially nuns, who were repeatedly violated and raped with cattle prods. One afternoon, a group of children led me into a small monastery where the basement had been turned into a torture chamber with brass bullet casings on the floor. The children were matter-of-fact as they pointed out dried blood stains and bullet holes on the walls and ropes hanging from the ceiling. I was shocked by their nonchalance. The children were acting as tour guides. I was glad to see children ice skating on homemade ice sleds, but Lhasa had changed. From the Jokang rooftop, I could see that the police station that had burned to the ground in the 1987 demonstration had been rebuilt, along with cameras on the rooftops around the bar court. Pilgrims still flocked to the Barkor Square and circumambulated around the Jokang Temple, but the traditional Tibetan homes were being demolished. For the past 4 years, I had often thought of the young monk I met in the Jokang Temple. To avoid being seen, I blended in with a group tour from the Lhasa Hotel.
What happens if a woman goes to a hospital with a second baby in the city? She's pregnant with a second baby. What happens in the hospital?
I think they don't allow to born, or maybe they give some medicine, or I don't know how. But they don't allow to. Also, usually they have no work because they don't allow to born.
A billboard outside Lhasa's People's Hospital extolled China's one-child policy. After hearing the Jokang monk describe children who were not allowed to be born, I went into the Lhasa People's Hospital with a hidden camera. The Tibetans called the Lhasa People's Hospital the butcher's place.
还用氧气，还是等你们呢这里开一点，然后呢就15分钟样子就够了。但你们医术呢比他们国外好。
So how long does operation take?
他说这个手术要花多长时间呢？像这样子的。 About half an hour. Yeah, if you want to ask any detailed things, you can ask him. Usually I have the many doctors.
Sure, that's fine. Yeah, thank you.
A surgeon gave me a tour of their sterilization ward.
Ethan?
医生。
Ethan? 没有了，就是。
I felt nauseous when I saw a nurse remove a woman's uterus and fetus from the operating room.
Sometimes here very busy.
Busy, yes.
So here that's thing special in the nurse very busy.
Oh.
I met a Nepali woman fluent in Tibetan and English at a Tibetan restaurant. She agreed to go into the People's Hospital with me and translate.
They have a baby.
Ah.
So cute.
First baby?
Yeah, first baby. Come tell me with the boy.
Boy.
Boy. They have to wait for 3 more years to have another child.
He
said, well, of course I love to have more children, especially if they are sons. Because a man could be very proud to have as many sons, as he can have. And his mentality is almost like counting the herd he has, She got pregnant this year. And now they already have 11 children, this is the 12th. So because what is born is already born.
Right.
Nothing to do. But this now new one that's in the stomach
Yes.
is a problem.
Yeah.
So he's thinking of all the others passing comments suggest, oh yes, he's going to take it out.
Yeah.
What's that? Vasectomy?
That would be for a man. Operation is
Called
sterilization.
sterilization.
Yeah.
Okay. She already had that.
Was it right after the baby or right after the baby or a few days?
Was born,
Yeah.
She said she decided from home that she was going to get it.
Yeah.
Because she 3 is enough. 범벅하자 이거.
아와더니 기우더니 자대 말을 직쇼 다우숨즈 시제 쇼 안식근데 시제 tuk시 도시 나량게리 슬리도아
She's the same story as the other girl who's the one who's got high blood pressure. She said her first baby she lost after 3 months, And then her second baby she was like 5 months pregnant or 6 or something. And again she was sick and she came to the hospital and then the doctors told her it would be either the mother's life.
Is this the chapchu?
Huh?
The chapchu?
첩축을 왜 했어? The thing
Yeah.
from the other side. You know where I mean.
그 명리가 되지. Nifno.
Levanor, yes.
Nifno.
Levanor.
Niflo.
Levanor is the name. Levanor, same.
Yes. Guagong.
Guagong. See, I learned a lot of words from her.
Then they can do what you call it, digging out or whatever. From 4 months onward is just leave no or whatever.
Yes.
And then even right up to 8 months they can do that. And all they have to do, right up to the end, they can just inject and then the whole thing will come out.
Yeah.
Seeing 2 Tibetan women being sterilized, a woman who agreed to be sterilized, 2 women coerced to have abortion and sterilization, and a nomad family with 11 children left me with more questions than answers about China's family planning policy. When Champa Tenzin was murdered, I blamed myself at first. I was wondering if I had been seen going into the Jokang Temple the last time I had taken a tape that Champa Tenzin had given me that was made inside a prison. It was basically identifying the prisoners. This is my name and age, and this is my treatment. This is where I'm from. And when I smuggled that out, I thought I was not seen going into or out of the monastery. So I blamed myself initially. And after being depressed for several months and thinking about this, I remembered something my father had told me before he died and said that adversity is also, or can also be, your greatest teacher. When I went back to Tibet in 1992 and 1993, I traveled to people's hospitals in Kerr and Ackerly. To protect Tibetans' identities, I brought a translator fluent in Mandarin to focus on the physicians implementing China's family planning policies. The Qinghai Red Cross Hospital was the largest in the province. I went into the obstetrics ward filming from my hip. How old?
How old are you?
Yes. Yes.
I think
You are Arsha,
24.
Very close.
My speak English very busy, not have a wrong.
Do you operate?
Yes,
You do operations?
I do.
Okay.
这个回应巴士吃不上吧，这巴士。其实大部分成。
When I came to in the hall, I saw a frightened woman waiting her turn. At the Tongren People's Hospital, 3 Chinese obstetricians did not notice my camera on the bookshelf.
像产科里面，有些啥，像现在都搞计划生育，大家在只能生1胎或者2胎，少数民族都只能生2胎，都为了保险，他们都到医院来生。但是像他一些边远的，就是比较远的，他们尽量在家里生。一般来在2个月之内，我们就直接吸出来。
2个月以下哈。
像2个月不到3个月的，我们就掐出来，牵出来。像4、5个月啊，真的一般就打药。 直接让它跟生一样生出来分娩。
对。
What happens after 6?
那6个月以后呢，就是要它。
6个月以后一般危险性比较大。它必要了，我们可以做剖腹产。像计划生育就是那个放缓啊，还有绝育啊、引产、必要啊，这些全部是国家免费。
是罚款，在不结扎就是去手里的工作，没工作。 现在我们只是没办法，都是不想接着，也不想开刀。现在是没办法，只是逼着做的。我们不应该是这样，我们属于是藏族嘛，也属于是少数民族。对。
If they do pay a fine, can that child go to school? Did they get a ration card?
有吗？第3胎就是罚3000。
要多少钱呢
？3000。
3000块钱。Yeah, it's a ration card and everything, but they pay 3,000. 3,000. 那3000块钱不小。
After a month traveling overland in Kerr and Ackerly, I needed a visa extension in order to go to remote areas. One night I met a policeman who challenged me to a drinking game. At the end of the night, I was wearing his hat. The next morning I had my visa.
Sometimes, for instance, if woman is 8 months pregnant, yeah, and she has abortion.
She has abortion.
Yeah, baby come out.
Come on, yes.
But sometimes baby is still alive. So What to do?
Yes,
What
I understand.
what to do? What do you do then?
What do I do then? 就当活着呗。哎。会说人。
Program for called eugenics. I don't know how to translate that word, except it was described as trying to raise the quality of the population by sterilizing women who were retarded. Do they ever hear of anything like this?
哦呀，对我们听说在甘肃省有
大一统的。上面制定的政策，我们下面就要执行。
There is a pressure continuum throughout Tibet. Women with unauthorized pregnancies who go to a people's hospital are at extreme risk of abortion and sterilization. Even if the family can pay an exorbitant fine, the parents face prosecution and demotion, and the unauthorized children will not get a ration card for basic food staples. They will not be allowed to go to school, work, or travel. In addition to seeing 13 sterilizations and 11 abortions in common Amdo, I confirmed 10 times that many accounts. I mean, we saw the same thing in the United States with the Native American. Now we have our Native American populations are pretty much reduced to very small pockets, very impoverished pockets in this country, and disenfranchised from having any hope, really. And I'm afraid that this is happening in Tibet. You know, that as they are outnumbered, as they are sterilized, as their institutions are outlawed, as they are not able to learn their own language in schools, that it's a slow, concerted, deliberate process of genocide.
The altitude is Tibet's best friend because it's not a place that a lot of outsiders want to live. And so even though a lot of Chinese are coming up, they'll go home to give birth or to retire because they really want to maintain those ties. So, you know, I'm still hopeful. I mean, Tibet still has in a way, a lot of time, and the Tibetans themselves are really investing in their own culture. And there's a lot of solidarity. You know, as long as their spirit remains, I think even though the political solution is nowhere in sight, and as long as the Communist Party remains relatively unchanged, it's hard to see any major political movement. But I always think, you know, what's happening on the ground, and I'm always so impressed by the Tibetan people.